ASMR Storytime. The Garden of Cosmic Speculation. Even under the softly humming nova lights of the Garden of Cosmic Speculation, Athena knew something looked off. She studied the bloom. Didn't touch it, that wasn't good for any sort of plant. But if she twisted her head a certain way, the normally plump, satiny petals seemed to be browning at the edges. Normally, the whole bloom was a soft green color. The very tips, if she squinted, were even a bit limp, unusual with the bloom's normally rigid structure. She raised her head to peer across the garden, pushing her goggles back. Above, the lights blared down, still underwhelming. Compared to the sight of the starry nebula shining through the atmosphere behind them. Around her, the other custodians mumbled to themselves and to each other, the hush only interrupted by the soft shoosh of the spades taking soil samples and the sound of running water. The scent of damp dirt lingered in every part of the garden, only distracted from by the synthetic chemical smell of her goggles. In the corner, a young man stood steadily funneling hose water from the settlement into a pitcher, sweat from lugging mulch across either side of the garden's perimeter glistening on his temple. "Hey, March," she called. Her heart fluttered a bit despite herself. "Have you seen this?" The internship with the greenhouse administration had been something she'd worked for her entire life. Every extra chemistry, biology, astrophysics, and galactic herbology class she'd been offered since primary school had been a burden she'd taken on, all to end up here. She couldn't help but think her family had had a greater hand in it regardless. Her mother and brother's reputations were a combination hard to ignore, and out of all the candidates vying for a spot in the garden, she had to wonder if they had been the only reason she'd been selected in the end. She must have at least been doing well enough, though, because eventually they promoted her to the official title of custodian. Given the number of years she'd been doing this, she felt her instincts were good enough to know when something was wrong. But this was new. March raised his eyes from his work. He fumbled the hose when he identified his caller. He cut the water. Hold on. Athena tried not to fidget as March made his way over, flicking water off his hands. She turned her eyes back to the bed, zeroing in on the bloom that had caught her attention. Flecks of ice crystallized at the base of the bloom. Not unusual. This one had to be for Natalie. She felt the air shift as March's warm presence filled the space beside her. She glanced at him. His face was eager and a little nervous. "Look at this," she said, pointing to the bloom of Natalie. March crouched down, bringing the plant to eye level. He squinted. "Wow," he said. "What's, wrong with it?" From the opposite end of the quiet garden, another custodian muttered, "This is embarrassing," in their general direction. Flushing, Athena clutched a hand on the edge of the plant bed. She really didn't need a running commentary on hers and March's inability to talk to each other like normal human beings. "Shut up, this is serious," she shouted across the cosmic greenhouse, not taking her eyes off the bloom. She turned back to March. "I don't know," she murmured. "Have you ever seen this before?" March had been caretaker for the garden for, she believed, about a year longer than she had been working there. It was hard to tell because she could hardly convince herself to speak to him. It was all shy smiles across the room and awkward hand waves. It was the sort of menial janitorial job that required a lot of patience. On that level, at least, he excelled. A relief compared to her other high-maintenance co-custodians. March stood up beside her. "No way," he said. "I've never seen one do this before." "What's going on?" Another nosy custodian stopped working in the bed across from her. "One of mine is wilting." She frowned at the succulent. It was hard to starve a succulent. "Wait, what?" The custodian rounded the trough, coming to join the speculation. She briefly eyed March, biting divots into her lip. The problem with March was that he was pretty bad at being caretaker. It wasn't as if he didn't try. He seemed to try very hard. But as much as she hated to admit it, March was an enormous klutz. She couldn't count the number of times she'd seen him trip over the water hose or, distracted by something beautiful, the stars that evening, a stray prism beetle that had managed to find a way in, knock ever so slightly into something vital and send it crashing to the floor. She didn't think... Well, the maintenance of the beds was mostly an aesthetic job. The health of the blooms should not have had anything to do with the amount of soil they got or how often they saw the moonlight. It was all about the planet, the health of the connecting core. He shouldn't have been able to do anything that detrimental, and she hadn't been doing anything differently. So why was it wilting? Dread twisted in her belly. When did that happen? Her fellow custodian towered over them, peering down at the sad bloom of Nadalin. "I just noticed it," Athena said. "It didn't look like this when I was here 2 days ago." Looking closely, even the fair fuzz on the bloom's surface seemed to have crisped. "Yeah, you should call the administration about that," the other custodian piped up from behind her. The administration. The custodian's murmuring gained a sudden amplitude. Athena thought back. When was the last time any of them had had to call the administration? Had they ever? She couldn't remember. And, of course, this would happen in her bed. Vispa and Soto, Nadalin and Tangala. 34 planets in 3 adjacent galaxies under her jurisdiction. 34 blooms in her bed. And 1 wilting. She took a deep breath. "Okay." Pushing away from her bed, moving around March, and trying not to show her own uneasiness, she marched towards the main communications hub at the front of the garden and punched in the number for the greenhouse administration. The garden's lights dimmed as the hollow feed for the greenhouse began to charge up. The insignia circled the circumference of the beam. Greenhouse administration. Your universe. In good hands. The other custodians were amassing behind her. She could hear them, and their shadows fell in beside hers. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw March standing off to the side. His blue eyes and slick dark hair flickered with the light from the projection. She wished he wasn't watching. Otherwise, this might not feel so personal. The stream booted up. A scene materialized in the beam. It was a boardroom, with its dramatically high chairs and its creamy yellow walls. Standing before the feed was the last person she wanted to see. The boy on screen, his greenhouse t-shirt on his chest looked more like a fan's merchandise than an official uniform, put his hands on his hips, staring out at her. He said, "How did I know?" A sardonic smile pulled at her lips. This was humiliating. I don't know, Mr. Administrator. It must be because you're a genius. Willie, who may have been a high-level advisor for the greenhouse administration, but would always first and foremost be her kid brother, seemed to lose his bluster, looking away and dropping his hands from his hips. They were quiet, but even so, there were a select number of people who believed she shouldn't be there, primarily because of Willie. Willie was only 10, but the kid's intelligence had always been daunting, even to her. He had quickly been deemed a prodigy as he was growing up, and once he expressed some ideas about research and administration methods for the greenhouse, the rest was history. She couldn't really blame the other custodians. It did look sketchy, being hired for an exclusive position in the expansive company for which her kid brother was a key advisor. Even so, one of her co-workers grumbled about unprofessionalism behind her. She could stuff it. Athena rarely got to see Willie anyways. He said, "Yeah, well," and coughed. "What do you have to report?" Athena straightened. "There's a matter that needs further attention. One of the blooms in my jurisdiction appears to be wilting." She had to force the words out. Telling the authorities seemed to make it real. For a moment, Willie just stared at her, expression stony. Then he said, "You're serious?" "Yeah." Willie turned heel and moved out of sight of the hollow feed, saying, "Whoa, okay, hold on." Several moments passed, Athena shifting in her spot before the hollow feed. Then the feed was reoccupied, Willie's youngness standing out in a group of 3 other people much older than him. One of them spoke up. "Thank you for your patience, Custodian Athena. Am I to understand that one of the cosmic blooms is wilting?" "Yes." Athena folded her hands behind her back, trying to look as official as possible. She had only interacted with the administration higher-ups on rare occasions. Once, when she was first chosen for the position, and every once in a while on their periodic audits. The bloom of Nadalin is showing signs of wilting. There is slight browning on the bloom, and it appears to be drooping. This just happened as of today, possibly yesterday. The higher-ups looked to one another. "That is concerning. You were right to report in." Athena tried to remember her procedures, ones she had never had to use. Of course, we're going to begin testing the composition of the plant and contents of the soil for any changes that might be present since our last samples, but..." She calculated. How many logs, how far back should she go? "It may take a while to process the previous year's samples for similar patterns. I wanted your advisement on how to proceed. I'm more concerned about Nadalin." The blooms had initially been engineered as a biological wellness scale. By continuously replicating the conditions and composition of a planet at any given moment onto a living stand-in, they would be able to observe any climate or otherwise major environmental shifts happening on that given planet, which they could then document for further observation. But something like this, Athena had never even heard of it. If this was happening to the bloom, then what sort of state was Nadalin in? Another of the officials spoke up. "Please allow us one moment to deliberate." The officials turned away from the feed, huddling together, Willie's smaller stature leaving a comical gap in the circle. After a moment of letting her stand there and sweat, they turned back. "Your concerns are valid," said the first official. Willie was looking awfully pleased with himself. "We believe we know what you need to do." That was part 1 of The Garden of Cosmic Speculation. If you would like to hear more, please let me know in the comments. I do enjoy doing these readings, and I would just like to know if there is something that you would like me to continue. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for more content of a similar nature. Otherwise, thank you for watching, and farewell to all of you lovely folks out there in the ether. Bye-bye.